At 55, after 29 years of marriage, Margaret Calloway Darnell walked out of a courtroom with a single duffel bag, a 2009 Ford Escape with a cracked windshield, and the deed to her father's bowling alley on Main Street in Holt, Missouri. It was the only asset Richard's attorneys hadn't bothered to negotiate. The house went to Richard. The savings accounts, the investment portfolio, the lake property outside Branson, all Richard. Peg drove 6 hours west toward a building she hadn't set foot in since the week her father died 8 years ago. Calloway Lanes had been closed since then, the sign still up, the doors locked. She'd come to sell it and keep moving. But behind the trophy wall in the back room was something Howard Calloway had spent 40 years quietly building. Something the whole town of Holt remembered long after his name faded from the sign. The hearing room at the family court of Caldwell County smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper, and the particular stillness of a room where endings happened regularly. Peg sat at the respondent's table and looked at the wood grain of the surface in front of her while Richard's attorney, a man named Foss, read the settlement terms into the record in a voice designed to suggest that all of this was entirely routine. It was not routine to Peg. It was 29 years of her life being divided into line items on a spreadsheet while Richard sat 3 feet away and looked at his phone. He put it face down when the judge glanced at him. That was the only concession Richard Darnell had made in the last 14 months. Peg had met Richard at a company picnic in Overland Park when she was 26. He was charming, certain of himself, the kind of man who filled a room without quite trying. She'd been working as a junior buyer for a furniture company and had a small apartment and a circle of friends she liked and a Sunday afternoon bowling habit she'd inherited from her father, who thought the bowling alley was the best democracy there was. Everyone the same weight in their hands. Everyone looking at the same 10 pins. She gave up the apartment when they married. She gave up the job not long after. She gave up the Sunday bowling somewhere in the first few years because Richard found it tedious, and Peg had learned early in their marriage that the path of least resistance was also the path that got her through the week. She thought she was building something. That was the part she still couldn't quite explain to herself. 29 years of choices that seemed reasonable, one at a time. And she'd looked up at 55 to find that what she'd built wasn't anything with her name on it. Richard had been seeing his current wife Dana for 4 years before Peg found out. She'd found out in the way women often found out, which was too late. Through a detail too small to have meant anything on its own, but which turned out to be the last detail in a very long sequence. A receipt in a jacket pocket. A restaurant she'd never been to. $48 and change for dinner for 2 on a Tuesday in January. She had not made a scene. She did not throw the receipt at him or say anything she'd regret. She picked up her phone and called her father's old lawyer, a man named Crosby and Holt, who'd been semi-retired for years, and she asked him what she needed to know. What she needed to know turned out to be considerable and took 14 months to sort through. Fossey read the asset schedule from a sheet of paper. The Briar Creek property, the Caldwell retirement accounts, the joint investment accounts, and the Branson Lake property all remained with Richard Darnell under the terms of the negotiated settlement. The 2009 Ford Escape, personal property located at the Briar Creek address, and the real property registered as Calloway Lanes at 114 East Main Street, Holt, Missouri, went to Margaret Calloway Darnell. Calloway Lanes. The bowling alley her father had run for 42 years. The only asset Richard's lawyers had appraised and then declined to negotiate over, because a 12-lane bowling alley in a small Missouri town that had been shuttered for 8 years was worth, in the estimation of Richard's team, approximately $22,000. Closing costs and liability transfer might eat that entirely. Richard had handed it to her with something that probably felt like generosity from the inside. Peg signed where she was directed to sign. 7 signatures, 4 initials. The judge said something formal and conclusory, and just like that the room was done with her. She walked to the parking lot with her duffel bag over one shoulder, and found the Ford Escape and sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting it. The September morning was warm, and the lot smelled like fresh tar from the patching crew at the far end. Through the windshield, she watched a sparrow land on the hood, consider things, and fly off. She pulled the deed from her bag. It was a copy, creased at the fold, printed on county letterhead. Calloway Lanes, 114 East Main Street, Holt, Missouri, deeded to Margaret Ann Calloway Darnell per the estate of Howard Raymond Calloway, deceased. Her father had left her the bowling alley when he died 8 years ago. She'd driven down for the service, stayed 4 days, helped June Harker from the diner organize the reception, and then locked the building and given the keys to old Crosby to hold until she decided what to do with it. She had never decided. Richard said the property taxes were a nuisance and the building wasn't worth maintaining and she should sell it and be done, and she'd agreed the way she'd agreed to most things, and somehow 8 years had passed without her doing anything about it one way or another. Now it was hers, officially, uncontestably, and it was all she had. She started the engine on the first try, which felt like something, though she couldn't have said what. She pulled out of the lot and pointed west on Highway 36. And the courthouse disappeared in the rearview mirror, and Peg Calloway Darnell drove toward Holt with $240 in her checking account and the radio tuned to whatever station had been set when she'd last borrowed the car from her friend Lorene, which turned out to be a gospel station out of Kansas City. And she left it there, because the music was steady and warm and she needed something to be both of those things just then. It was 6 hours to Holt. The highway stretched flat and easy through the central Missouri farmland, soybean fields going gold at the edges, occasional silos in the distance. She stopped once for gas and a coffee, and ate the granola bar she'd packed that morning. Because she had $240 in gas for 6 hours, and she didn't need to spend anything she didn't have to. She thought about her father, Howard Calloway, who had run a 12-lane bowling alley in a town of 4,000 people for 42 years without once complaining about it, who got up before 6 every morning to polish the lanes and set out the rental shoes and make sure the pin machines were adjusted before the first league arrived, who knew the name of every regular and the names of their children and most of their children's children, who had a handshake that made people feel they'd been seen. She had grown up in that building on weekends and summer afternoons, helping him keep score and waxing the balls and listening to him talk to the regulars about nothing that mattered and everything that did. She had bowled her first 200 game at 14 on lane 3. And Howard had posted the score sheet on the bulletin board by the front door and left it there until it yellowed. She hadn't been in the building since the week of his funeral. She hadn't bowled since sometime in the first years of her marriage, when it had simply stopped being part of her life. The highway curved toward Holt around 5 in the afternoon, and the light was long and golden across the fields, and Peg turned onto East Main Street and slowed down as the familiar shape of the building came into view. She pulled over across the street and looked at it for a moment. Calloway Lanes. The sign was still up, white letters on a blue background, the C in Calloway slightly faded at the bottom where the sun had hit it for years. The parking lot had weeds coming through the asphalt cracks. One of the front windows had a crack in the upper corner, sealed with a strip of weathered tape. The marquee below the sign read, in letters that must have been the last thing her father had put up before he got sick, Thursday leagues, still forming. Call for details. 8 years. Peg got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk with Crosby's old key in her hand. He'd mailed it to her care of Lorene's address when the divorce proceedings started, just in case. And she looked at the building her father had tended for 42 years. She was going to sell it. She was going to sell it, get what she could get, and figure out what came next from there. She crossed the street and put the key in the lock. She called Lorene from a rest stop somewhere east of Sedalia, about an hour and a half into the drive. Lorene was her oldest friend from before Richard, from the Overland Park years, the one person who had always kept a separate relationship with Peg that Richard hadn't managed to absorb. She answered on the first ring. "You out?" Lorene said. "I'm out. How do you feel?" Peg looked through the windshield at a stand of scrub trees along the edge of the rest stop. "Empty," she said. "Like after the dentist when the numbing is still on. That'll wear off." "I know." "Lorene, I'm going to Holt. To my dad's bowling alley." A brief pause. "You're going to sell it?" "I don't know yet." "Peg." Lorene's voice was careful. "You said you didn't want to deal with that place until you were settled somewhere." "I don't have somewhere to be settled in. I have $240 and a truck with a cracked windshield. The bowling alley is the only address I have." Lorene was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "Call me when you get there. And Peg, whatever's in that building, it's still your dad's. That's not nothing." "I know," Peg said. "That's the whole point," Lorene said. "That's the whole point." On the night she decided to stay, Peg called Crosby. It was past 9 and she was sitting on the old couch in the back room with a ledger in her lap, and she picked up the phone and called him because he'd been keeping the key for 8 years, and he deserved to know that the building it belonged to was going to be used. Crosby answered the way he answered everything, like he'd been expecting the call and had a pen ready. "Peg," he said. "Crosby, I'm not selling the bowling alley." A silence. Then, "I see. I found something." My father kept a record. What kind of record? Everything he did for people over 40 years. Names, amounts, dates. He kept it behind a wall, behind the trophy shelving in the back room. Another silence, longer. Crosby had been practicing law for a long time, and she could hear him thinking. "How far back does it go?" 1968. "Good heavens," he said. It was not a dramatic expression from him. It was the quiet version of surprise that a man his age applied to things that truly caught him off guard. "Is it in his handwriting?" "Every word." "And you're going to reopen the place?" "Yes, with what resources?" The question was direct, not unkind. He was a lawyer. He needed to know. Not much yet. But the town has been helping. People are showing up. People whose names are in the book. "Yes," Crosby said slowly. "That sounds exactly right." A pause. "I'm glad you went, Peg. I'm glad you didn't send someone to list it without going yourself. Your father wanted you to go yourself." "He wrote me a letter," Peg said. Another long pause. "I know," Crosby said. "He told me it was there. He made me promise not to say." Peg absorbed that. "He knew you'd come when you were ready," Crosby said. "He just didn't want to rush you." She sat in the back room in the dark with the ledger and thought about Howard Calloway, who had known things about her he'd kept to himself with the patience of a man who understood that timing was a form of kindness. "Thank you, Crosby," she said. "It's what I'm here for," he said. "Call me if Fossey sends anything." "I will." She hung up. She put the ledger on the shelf beside the dead coffee maker. She lay down on the couch and listened to the building settle around her. She slept better than she had in months. The smell reached her before she was fully inside. Bowling alleys had a particular smell that wasn't quite anything else. Lane oil and rubber and the specific dry warmth of a large room that's been closed too long. Calloway Lanes had that smell, layered now with 8 years of dust and the faint must of old carpet. Peg stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. The lanes were still there. All 12 of them, running back into the dim of the building, their surfaces dulled with dust but intact. The rental shoe cubbies along the right wall held their inventory. Hundreds of pairs and sizes she'd helped her father sort more times than she could count. The scoring desks at each lane had their pencil holders and their little notepads. The ceiling tiles showed water staining in one corner near lane 8, she made a note of that. The automatic pin machines at the far end were still, 9 sets of pins neatly racked, one set, lane 4, where 3 pins had tipped at some point and nobody had been there to reset them. She walked to the front desk where Howard had stood every morning of her childhood. His green cardigan was draped over the chair. It was a dark green wool cardigan, slightly shapeless from years of being worn and washed, with the sleeves pushed up to the elbows the way he always wore it. Someone, him, she supposed, on his last day here, had laid it across the back of the chair the same way she'd seen him do 1,000 times, pulling it off when the morning got warm enough. Like he'd be back for it. On the desk in front of the chair, the tally sheet from the last league night he ran. Thursday men's, December 12th, 8 years ago. 6 teams, the scores filled in through frame 7 of the third game, and then the hand that had been filling them in had simply stopped. The pencil was still there, resting in the groove at the top of the sheet where it had been set down. And in the corner of the frame where Howard had always taped things, phone numbers, reminders, the occasional photo of a regular's new grandchild, a photograph. The Calloway Lanes Thursday Men's League, 1971. 8 men in matching green bowling shirts with Calloway Lanes on the back, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. Howard was in the center, maybe 30 years old, with his hair darker and his face younger, but the same quality of ease about him, the same look that said he was exactly where he wanted to be. Peg picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long time. She set it down carefully. She put the cardigan on because the building was cool and because it fit her the way things fit that have been worn long enough to have found their shape. She walked the lanes. She tested the pins on lane 4 and found the reset mechanism still functional, just stiff from years of stillness. She checked the ball return racks and found them clear. She went to the back room where Howard had kept his tools and his paperwork and a coffee maker that had probably been purchased sometime in the Carter administration. The coffee maker was still there. There was a bag of ground coffee on the shelf beside it that had gone hard and should be thrown out. She made a note of that too. The back room had a long wall covered floor to ceiling with trophies. 40 years of Callaway Lane's tournaments and leagues, the brass plates recording names and dates going back to 1968. Peg ran her finger along one row. Harker, June, Ladies Spring League, 1987. Second place. The name caught her. June Harker, who ran the diner across the street, who had helped plan Howard's reception. She scanned and found June's name in 3 more rows. She found her own name on a shelf near eye level. Callaway, Margaret, Junior League, 1979. High game, 187, not the 200 game from Lane 3 in 1981. She looked for that one and found it further along. Callaway, Margaret, 1981. High game of record, 204. She stood there for a moment. Then she went to find the fuse panel to see what was still working. Most of it was. The electrical was old but functional. The plumbing ran when she turned the main back on, though 2 fixtures needed new washers. The boiler came on with some persuasion and ran rough for 10 minutes before settling. The refrigerator behind the concession counter was dead. She unplugged it, but the counter itself was solid. She slept that first night on the old couch in the back room, the one Howard had used for afternoon naps, with his cardigan around her shoulders and the building's quiet settling around her. The night sounds of Holt were modest. A car on Main Street every so often. A dog somewhere 2 blocks over. The building ticking as it cooled. She thought she should sell it. She thought she would decide in the morning. In the morning she found the compartment. She'd been moving furniture from the back room out to the main floor to get a better look at the structural condition of the back wall, and when she pulled the trophy shelving unit away from the wall, she saw it. A panel that didn't match. The back wall was standard drywall over the old cinder block, painted cream. But the area behind where the trophy shelving had stood was a slightly different shade, newer work, maybe 20 years old. A section about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, with a piano hinge on one side that was painted over but not quite concealed. She pushed on the right edge of the panel. It swung open. Behind it was a space about 18 inches deep, cut into the cinder block of the original wall. It was dry inside. Howard had sealed the edges with caulk before he painted over the hinge. On the shelf inside, 2 things. A small flashlight that still worked when she clicked it, and a ledger book. The ledger was the old kind, the accounting sort with green columns and red margins. The kind of ledger you found in the supply section of a hardware store sometime before computers made them irrelevant. The cover was dark blue, worn at the corners. On the inside front cover, in Howard's handwriting, she knew it the same way she knew the shape of the building. By long familiarity, it said simply, "The book." She took it to the front desk and sat in Howard's chair in Howard's cardigan and opened it. The first entry was dated September 14th, 1968, and it read, Peterson, Carl, League Dues, Fall Session. Short $12. Will pay when he can. Good man. The entries ran in Howard's careful hand, every one of them following the same format. A name, a date, a dollar amount, a note. Short $8. Short $15. Short $40, medical bills this month. Good family. The Wyatt boys, both in Junior League, fees covered. Ruth Abernathy, widowed last spring, comped all year. Danny Kellner, lost his job at the plant, ran a tab of $211, forgave it $12.82 after his wife left. Good man, hard season. The ledger covered 40 years. 40 years of Howard quietly carrying the people who needed carrying. With no ceremony and apparently no expectation of return, recording it in this book behind this wall in his handwriting so small and even it was like reading something stitched rather than written. Peg turned the pages slowly. Near the middle of the book, around 1989, there were more entries than usual. A recession year, she recognized. Howard had noted 12 different accounts that year, the dollar amounts ranging from a few dollars of deferred dues to several hundred. One entry was larger than the others. She would come back to that entry later. She didn't fully understand what she was reading yet. She closed the ledger when the light through the windows had shifted to afternoon. She sat with it in her lap for a while. She was not going to sell this place. The thought arrived fully formed, the way certain decisions do, not as a conclusion she'd reasoned toward, but as a fact she'd simply uncovered. She was going to reopen Callaway Lanes. She didn't have any money. She didn't have a plan. She had a building that needed work, and a week's worth of clothes in a duffel bag, and $240 in a checking account. She was going to reopen it anyway. She picked up the ledger and carried it with her to the fuse panel to see what she'd missed on the first pass. Howard had helped this town for 40 years without asking anything back. She figured the town could stand to know that now. Donna Peterson showed up on the third morning with a casserole and a list of questions about the building's condition in that order. She was 71 and small and brisk in the way of women who had spent a lifetime deciding things and executing them. She set the casserole on the front counter and looked around the main floor with an evaluating eye. "Carpet's worn," she said. "Dale's going to do it next week," Peg said. "Good. What about the ball return on 6? Peg looked at her. "How do you know about lane 6? "Earl, that's my husband. Carl's been gone 6 years. Earl used to bowl on lane 6 every Thursday for 30 years. Said it had a particular role on the approach. Sentimental about it." She walked to lane 6 and crouched down and looked at the base of the return rack. "It's sitting wrong." "I know. I'm working on it. You need a level?" "I have one." "Then you're set." Donna stood back up with the ease of a woman who'd been doing physical things her whole life. "Your dad let us have our league dues on credit in the winter of 1968. We'd just moved here. Carl had been laid off. I was 3 months along with Dale. Howard never said a word about it, never made us feel it. He just kept writing down our names the same as everyone else and running the tally at the end of the season." She paused. "I've been waiting to do something about that for 55 years. "You don't have to, I know I don't have to," Donna said. "That's what I'm telling you." She went back to the casserole. "This is chicken and rice. Your father ate it every time I brought it to him. He claimed he didn't have a preference, but he always finished it." Peg almost smiled. "He told me he didn't have preferences about food either. He absolutely had preferences. He just didn't think it was polite to say so." Donna picked up her bag. "Dale will be here at 8 tomorrow. He's a good worker. He's his father's son in that way." She left the same way she'd arrived, direct and purposeful, with no ceremony. Stu Bradshaw, the heating man, stayed longer than the job required. He was in his late 40s. With the patience of a man who'd learned to diagnose problems without rushing, and after he gave Peg the bad news about the heat exchanger, he sat on the equipment room bench and didn't immediately leave. "How much do you know about these old units?" he asked. "Enough to know this one's done," Peg said. "That's about right." He turned the maintenance manual in his hands. "I fixed this boiler 3 times for your dad. Once in 09, once in 14, once in 17. He always asked what else I saw while I was in there. He'd get a notepad and write down what I said. He was thorough," Peg said. "He was. He fixed things before they broke, which is how this building's in the shape it is after 8 years closed." Stu set the manual down. "I'll be straight with you. A replacement unit at commercial size is going to run you $4,700, minimum, parts and labor. I know that's a lot. I know it's a lot too. Do you have it?" "No," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The community here takes care of its own. Your dad did a lot over the years. People remember." He stood up. "Don't wait too long on this. You can't open without heat." "I'm aware," Peg said. "I'll write you a formal quote. That'll give you something to work with when you talk to people." He picked up his bag. "For what it's worth, my boy bowled in the junior league here in 2011 and 2012. Won the high game trophy in his second year. Still has it on his dresser." He paused at the door. He'd be pleased to know the place was open. He left the quote on the counter. Peg looked at it. $4,600. She went to lane 3 and sat down. June Harker showed up the second morning before 8 o'clock with 2 coffees in paper cups and a look on her face that said she'd known the Ford Escape parked out front would eventually arrive. She was 67 and built like a woman who'd been on her feet for 40 years because she had been running the Harkers' diner across the street since she and her late husband Roy opened it in 1984. She had white hair she kept practical and short, and the habit of saying exactly what she meant, which Howard had apparently found refreshing in a friend. "I saw your light on last night," June said, handing Peg a coffee through the open front door of Callaway Lanes. "Thought it might be you. Thought it might be vandals. Decided it was probably you." "How'd you decide that?" "Vandals wouldn't have come in through the front door in broad daylight and left the lights on polite like that." June stepped inside and looked around the main floor the way someone looks at a place they haven't seen in a while but haven't forgotten. "Lord, it's the same. Mostly, that carpet needs replacing. It was tired when Howard had it put in, and that was 15 years ago." June walked to the front desk, stopped when she saw the cardigan on the chair. Her expression shifted briefly. He wore that sweater every single day from October through April. I know, Peg said. I found it on the chair. He put it there the last day he closed up, the day before he went into the hospital the first time. I watched him lock the door from across the street. June picked up the tally sheet and looked at it. He called me that night and said he wasn't going to be back for a few days. That was the last time I talked to him. She set the sheet down carefully. I cleaned his house after, with Ruth Abernathy and Donna Peterson. We kept offering to come deal with the building too. But your father's lawyer said to leave it for you to decide. I didn't decide, Peg said. I just waited until I ran out of alternatives. June considered this. Well, that's one way to get here. She looked around the building again. You going to sell it? No, Peg said. I've decided I'm not. June looked at her steadily. Okay, she said. What do you need? Peg thought about it honestly. The building needed the carpet replaced, and the ceiling tiles in the corner repaired where they'd stained, and the refrigerator unit replaced, and probably a good deep clean of every surface that had collected 8 years of dust. Smaller things, new washers and 2 fixtures, a supply order of cleaning materials, an inspection on the ball return mechanisms that she could probably do herself if she had the manual, which she suspected was somewhere in the back room. The shoe rental inventory needed a full assessment. The marquee needed new letters. None of that was insurmountable, given time and modest resources. What she did not yet have was any understanding of the commercial reality of running a bowling alley in a town of 4,000. She said this to June. Same as any Main Street business, June said, sitting down on one of the bench seats along the side wall. You get the regulars through the door and you treat them right, and you don't go chasing things you can't afford, and you keep the coffee on. Your dad had 6 leagues running Thursday through Saturday, 2 junior leagues on Saturday mornings, open bowling the rest of the time. He turned a profit most years. Not a big one. Enough. How many people in those leagues are still in Holt? Most of them. This isn't a town that people leave much. June set her coffee down. People have been asking about this place since the week Howard died. Whether it was going to reopen, whether anyone was going to do something with it. Every couple of years someone asks me when you're coming back. She paused. I didn't have a good answer. I didn't have a good answer either, Peg said. I do now. June nodded slowly. Then she took out her phone and started making a list. Within 4 days, Peg understood what her father had built. It started with June, who called 3 women from the Old Ladies Thursday League and told them what was happening. One of them, Donna Peterson, 71, whose husband Carl's name was in the first entry in Howard's ledger, called the Holt Hardware and told her son Dale to expect a call. Dale showed up the next morning with a tape measure and 2 employees and gave Peg a contractor's assessment of the building. No charge. He handed her the estimate at the end and said if she wanted to go ahead he could do the carpet and the ceiling tiles in a week, and the price he quoted was considerably lower than it should have been, and when Peg started to say something about that, Dale said, Your dad ordered hardware from us for 40 years, and always paid on time and always asked how my mother was doing. Price is the price. Ruth Abernathy, who was 81 and drove herself everywhere still, showed up on the 3rd day with a carload of cleaning supplies and spent 3 hours wiping down the scoring desks without being asked. Talking the whole time about the 1987 Ladies Spring League in which she had, against all reasonable expectation, bowled the high game of the season. A man named Ed Greer, who Peg didn't know, stopped by on a Thursday to say he'd done the pin machine maintenance for Howard for 12 years and still had all the manual binders and could have a look if she wanted. He looked. He said 3 of the machines needed new drive belts that he could get from his supplier at cost, and the rest were fine. The town was repaying something. Peg understood this better as the days went on. She read more of the ledger in the evenings, and the names she was reading during the day kept appearing on the pages. Peterson, Abernathy, Greer, Harker, June herself, a line from 1989 that noted she and Roy had been behind on their dues during a slow winter, and Howard had let it run without saying a word. And many others, small amounts and large, debts forgiven and fees waived and things given that were never announced. Howard had done this privately, without a church announcement or a community fundraiser or any mechanism that required recognition. He'd just done it, year after year, and written it down in a ledger he kept behind a wall where nobody would find it. Until now. Things were moving. The building was getting cleaner. Dale's crew was scheduled for the following Monday. Ed Greer had the drive belts on order. June's morning visits had become a fixture, the two of them drinking coffee at the front desk and talking through what needed doing next. Then the boiler failed. It happened on a Tuesday in the third week, a cold morning when Peg turned it on and got the rumbling start she'd come to expect, and then, after about 20 minutes, a deeper sound that was not right. And then a sound that was also not right in a different and worse way, and then nothing. She called the heating and cooling company listed in the yellow pages she found in Howard's back room, because it was 1994 and hadn't been updated since, and they had gone out of business. She got the number for Holt Mechanical from Ed Greer, and they sent a man named Stu Bradshaw who spent 2 hours in the boiler room and came out looking the way repair people looked when the news wasn't good. The heat exchanger was cracked. The system was too old to patch in any permanent way. A replacement boiler would run, in the current market for a commercial unit of that size, somewhere between $4,000 and $4,800 with installation. Peg sat with that number for a moment. She had rebuilt her checking account to $311 after the gas money and a grocery run. "What happens if I run it as is?" she asked. "It'll work until it doesn't," Stu said. "Could be next week. Could get through the winter. But I can't tell you which." He left her with his written report and the phone number of a commercial vac supplier in Chillicothe. She sat in the front seat of the Ford for 20 minutes looking at the number. $4,800. She went back inside. She went to lane 3, which had been her lane since childhood, the one where she'd bowled her first 200. And she sat down at the scoring desk and put her hands flat on the surface and thought. She could not run a bowling alley in a Missouri winter without heat. She was not going to walk away from this building. She picked up the pencil from the scoring desk groove. She wrote at the top of the old tally sheet she'd been using for notes, $4,800. Then under it she wrote, "Find a way." June came in with coffee the next morning, and Peg told her about the boiler. June drank her coffee and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How many Saturdays until you open?" "I was hoping 6 weeks. That's 6 Saturdays." June set her cup down. "I know a thing or two about raising money for things that need doing in this town. Let me make some calls." Peg started to say she didn't want to ask anyone for charity. "It's not charity," June said. "It's investment. This town has been waiting 8 years for this building to come back. People here are going to want to be part of that. Let them." Peg was quiet. "Your father never turned down help when it was genuinely offered," June said. "That's different from asking." "How is it different?" "Because people want to give it," June said. "That's the difference." Peg thought about the ledger. All those names. All those small amounts, accepted without fanfare, repaid now in carpet measurements and drive belts and cleaning supplies. "All right," Peg said. "Make the calls." June made the calls. By the following Friday, people had come through who'd contributed enough to cover the boiler. Not in the form Peg expected. Not a single check from one person feeling magnanimous, but in the form of a dozen contributions between $20 and $300, each one from someone with a name in Howard's ledger, or a child whose name was in it, or a neighbor of someone who was. Dale Peterson from the hardware store put in $250 and said it was an investment in foot traffic on Main Street, which was how he managed to give it without sentiment, which was how Peg managed to accept it. Ed Greer put in $100 and called it what he was calling it, which was a long overdue thank you. Ruth Abernathy brought an envelope with $40 in it, all small bills, and said Howard had been kind to her in the year after her husband died and she'd been meaning to do something about that for a while. June herself didn't put in money. Instead, she organized the Saturday work morning 3 weeks before opening day. When 12 people showed up at 8 a.m. to help lay the new carpet and clean the rental shoe inventory and polish the lane surfaces and touch up the paint on the front entrance. She made coffee from a commercial urn she brought from the diner and kept it going all morning, and by noon the building looked like a place that was preparing to be loved again rather than one that had been waiting for permission. Peg worked alongside them all. She learned a lot of names that morning. She learned that Carl Peterson's grandson was now the age Carl had been in that first ledger entry. She learned that Ruth Abernathy had bowled a perfect 300 game in 1993 on Lane 7, and that the story of it had apparently never stopped being told. She learned that a woman named Lila Cross had been driving past the building for 8 years with a specific feeling she didn't have a word for. And now she did, and the word was hope. New carpet. Ceiling tiles replaced, the marquee updated, Callaway Lanes, reopening Oct 18, leagues forming. All welcome. Peg designed the flyer herself on the library's computer. She put them in every business on Main Street and the gas station on Route 36 and the post office and the elementary school gym. The boiler was installed on a Wednesday in the third week by Stu Bradshaw and his partner, and it ran on the first try, clean and steady and warm, and Peg stood in the main floor and felt the heat come up and something in her chest loosened that had been tightened for a long time. She had 2 lanes, still not quite right. The ball return on lane 6 was sticking in a way she hadn't been able to diagnose, and lane 11 had a wobble in the approach boards she was planning to address with a sander over the weekend. The concession counter was clean and restocked with basics. The rental shoes were organized by size, labeled, and ready. She wasn't finished, but she was close. What Peg found next is the reason this story needed to be told. If you're still with her, hit subscribe, because what Howard built is still waiting to be fully seen. She woke up on a Monday morning, 3 weeks before opening day, with a feeling that the day was going to go well. She was wrong about that. The letter was in the day's mail, certified return receipt requested. From the law offices of Fosse and Kramer in Overland Park, Richard's attorney. She opened it at the front desk in Howard's cardigan, which she had more or less been wearing every morning, and read it twice. It was not a short letter. It ran 3 pages of dense legal language that she had to parse carefully, and what it said, stripped of the language, was this: Richard Darnell's legal team had identified a question regarding the transfer of the Callaway Lanes property that they believed warranted review. Specifically, they noted that the property had been identified in a joint financial assessment during a brief period of Peg's marriage, in which it had appeared on a routine asset disclosure form as a potential inheritance asset. The letter argued that this inclusion, however procedural, created a basis for revisiting whether the property should have been subject to the full division of marital assets, rather than treated as a separately inherited asset. The letter concluded by noting that their client had become aware of certain development activity in Holt's Main Street corridor, a reference she understood immediately to the historic district designation that the County Planning Commission had been discussing for months, which June had mentioned in passing, and which would significantly increase property values on Main Street, and that in light of this, their client was requesting a review of the original settlement terms regarding the property. It was a claim. A legal claim, structured carefully, premised on a technical argument about a document she didn't remember signing. Richard didn't want a bowling alley. Richard had done some arithmetic, and the arithmetic had changed his mind. Peg set the letter on the front desk. She looked at the lanes. She thought about the cardigan, the tally sheet, the trophy with her name on it from 1981, the ledger in its hiding place, the 40 years of quiet in Howard's handwriting, the names of the people who'd come and laid carpet and brought coffee and given what they had. She thought about what it would mean if Richard's claim succeeded. She picked up the phone and called Crosby. Crosby was semi-retired and answered his own phone at 9 in the morning the way lawyers from before voicemail did. "I've gotten a letter from Fosse," she said. A pause. "Tell me what it says." She read him the relevant sections. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The argument is thin," he said, "but it's not nothing. The joint asset disclosure issue is a real legal question in Missouri. It depends on how it was filed and what exactly the language said. I don't remember signing anything that mentioned the bowling alley. You may not have. It may have been included in a blanket disclosure at a standard inventory point. We'd need to pull the records." Another pause. "Peg, I need to ask you something. Are there any financial documents in that building? Any records that were your father's?" She thought about the ledger. She thought about the locked back room where Howard had kept his business files. "I'll look," she said. "Good, and Peg, this is going to require more than what I can do semi-retired. You need someone who handles contested estates and divorce supplementals. I know a young woman in Chillicothe who's been doing this for 5 years. Her name is Anna Marsh. She's good, and she's fair." "I don't have a lot of money, Crosby. Let me call Anna first," he said. "Don't panic yet." She hung up. She was not panicking. She was, very quietly, furious. Richard had not contested the bowling alley in 14 months of contentious divorce proceedings. He'd handed it to her, appraised it low, let his lawyers sign off. Now, 3 weeks before she was set to reopen, with work crews and carpet and a new boiler paid for by the people of Holt, now he'd found his way to a claim. He'd heard about the historic designation. He'd done the math, and he'd decided that whatever was his by any conceivable argument, however thin, was worth the legal fees to pursue. That was Richard. That had always been Richard. He had measured everything in her life by what it was worth in a transaction, and she had spent 29 years mistaking that measurement for values, which was the kind of error that was easy to make when you were inside it and very clear once you were out. She was out. She called June. "Come to the diner," June said. "I'll make eggs. I need to find the rest of Howard's records first." "Then come after," June said. "Eggs keep." Anna Marsh was 41 and had been doing estate law and divorce supplementals in Chillicothe for 6 years, and she spoke on the phone the way good lawyers spoke, directly, without flourish, organized into clearly numbered points. "Crosby has given me the background," she said. "Let me be honest with you about what we're dealing with." "Please," Peg said. "The boilerplate disclosure argument is thin but real. Fossey will argue that the property's inclusion on the disclosure, even with the parenthetical, established it as an asset subject to the community review period. Your side argues it was explicitly exempted, which the filing language does suggest. It's a judgment call for the court. What's our position? Strong. The original deed transfer is clean. Your father's will is unambiguous. The savings account was structured outside any community property framework from inception." A pause. "The stronger element, honestly, is the ledger." "How so?" "If the court accepts the ledger as a community record, which I think it will, given the 40-year scope and the town's involvement, it establishes that this building is not a private real estate asset in any ordinary sense. It's a community institution. Fossey's client is trying to extract a piece of something that functioned as a public good for 4 decades. That's a harder sell." "And the entry about Richard?" A brief silence. "That's your decision, not mine. Legally, it's relevant background to the petitioner's relationship with the benefactor. Whether you want to introduce it depends on what you want the hearing to accomplish." Peg thought about it. "I want the judge to understand what my father was," she said, "and I want the judge to understand who Richard is. Then we'll include it," Anna said. "I'll have the filing ready Thursday." When Peg went across the street and told June about the letter and the legal situation and what Anna had said, June listened the whole way through with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When Peg finished, June set the cup down. "That man," June said without elaboration, in the tone of a woman who had spent 67 years developing a precise vocabulary for people like Richard Darnell, but who had also lived long enough to know that the most accurate words were sometimes the most economical. "He did the arithmetic on the historic designation," Peg said. "When he thought the bowling alley was worth $22,000, he didn't want it. Now the math is different." "The math was never the point," June said. "The math is never the point with men like that. The point is that someone who walked away with something has it, and they don't, and that's not tolerable to them regardless of how it happened." Peg looked at her coffee. "Richard isn't interested in a bowling alley," June said. "Richard is interested in the fact that something is yours." The words sat between them for a moment. "Anna thinks we'll win," Peg said. "I'm sure you will," June said. "Howard made sure of it. He made sure of almost everything you're going to need before he was gone." She looked out the diner window at the bowling alley across the street, the new letters on the marquee visible from here. "I was at the building when he was locking it up the last time. I asked him if he was going to be all right. He said he was. I asked him if he'd left things in order." She paused. "He said, June, I've been leaving things in order my whole life. That building is the most in order thing I've ever made." She picked up her coffee again. "I didn't know then what he meant. I think I know now." Peg looked at her. "He meant you," June said simply. "He meant it was ready for you." The morning after Peg found the ledger, June came in with coffee and read the first 3 pages before she put it down. She set it on the front desk very carefully, the way you set something down when you don't quite trust yourself to hold it right. "How many names?" she asked. "I haven't counted. Hundreds, over 40 years. He never said a word." "Did you know?" Peg asked. "That he was doing this?" June thought about it. "I knew he was generous. You couldn't know Howard Callaway for more than a week and not know that. But I didn't know he was keeping track of it." She touched the ledger cover. "Most people who do good things either expect something back or they don't keep records because they want to forget they did it. Howard kept records because he wanted to remember the people. He wrote something at the top of a 1972 entry," Peg said. She found the page. He wrote, "The names of the point." June read it. "Yes," she said. "That's Howard." They sat with that for a moment. "There's an entry for you," Peg said. 1989, Winter League dues, 5 months. He let it run. June was quiet. "Roy was sick that winter," she said. "Finally, I didn't say anything to anyone. I just kept coming to the diner every morning and keeping things going, and every Thursday I came to bowl because Howard had the league, and it was the only hour of the week where I didn't have to think about anything else." She paused. "He never mentioned the dues, not once. Just kept writing my name in the roster every week like I'd paid in full." Peg didn't say anything. "I would have asked if I'd known he'd noticed," June said. "I would have been embarrassed." She looked at the ledger. "That's why he didn't say anything." On the Saturday of the work morning, when 12 people showed up with brushes and cleaning supplies and Dale's crew arrived with the carpet rolls, June moved through the building like she'd been managing it her whole life. "Lane 9 roller needs the left guide adjusted," she told Ed Greer. "I know. I already got it," Ed said. "The concession counter surface needs a second pass. There's a mineral deposit at the far end." "June," a man named Hank Wyatt said from across the room, "are you going to inspect everything, or are you going to help?" "Both," June said, without looking up from the concession counter. There was laughter from several lanes. Peg listened to the building fill up with voices and movement, the sound of work being done, and she thought, this is what he built too. The web of it. The people who kept showing up for each other because someone had kept showing up for them. The night before the hearing, Peg sat at the front desk for a long time. June came by at 7:30 with soup in a container from the diner. "You should eat," June said. "I know. Are you ready?" "Anna says the case is solid." "That's not what I asked," June said. "I asked if you're ready." Peg looked at the lanes, at the overhead lights reflecting off the clean surfaces, at the trophies in their rows, all those names, all those years. "I came here to sell it," she said. "I know I was going to take whatever I could get and start over somewhere and figure out what came next." "I know that too," June said. "Instead, I'm sitting here the night before a hearing to keep it, and I've spent $4,700 I didn't have on a boiler, and I've hired 2 people. And I've eaten soup from your diner 4 nights a week for 2 months. Peg paused. "I'm not sure when that happened." "About the second morning," June said. "When you told me you weren't going to sell. The first morning I didn't know I wasn't going to sell." "I know. But you had the look of someone who wasn't going to sell." June set the soup on the desk. "You had the look of your father. That particular expression he got when a thing needed doing and he was the one who was going to do it." Peg looked at her. "He was proud of you, Peg," June said. "He never stopped being proud of you. I want you to know that, because I don't think he said it often enough." "He wrote it," Peg said. "In the letter." "I know. But I want you to hear it from someone who was there." June picked up her bag. "Eat the soup. Get some sleep. And in the morning, let Anna do her job and trust Howard to have done his." She headed for the door. "That man has been protecting you for 29 years without you knowing it. One more day shouldn't be hard for him." She went out into the November evening. Peg ate the soup. Then she went to lane 3 and bowled 6 frames by herself. The way she used to bowl when she needed to think about nothing at all, just the weight of the ball and the sound of it running true down the lane, and the clean particular satisfaction of pins that had been exactly where they should have been going exactly where they should go. She scored a 178. Her best game in 30 years. Howard, she thought, would have posted the score sheet. She went back to the building before the eggs. The business records were in the locked filing cabinet in the back room. Howard's key ring, which Crosby had mailed along with the building key, had a small brass key she'd assumed was a safe deposit key and hadn't thought about. It fit the filing cabinet. 4 drawers of orderly annual folders going back to 1974. Tax records. Lease renewal documents for the lane equipment. Insurance policies. The supply account with Dale's father's hardware store, running from 1971 to 2018, every invoice kept. Maintenance records. Personnel files for the 4 part-time employees Howard had paid over the decades. Nothing in the files mentioned a joint asset disclosure. Nothing mentioned Richard at all. She would let Anna Marsh sort out the legal question. What she was looking for was something else. Evidence of Howard's character. Evidence of the building's history. The kind of record that told a story rather than just a balance sheet. She was going through the bottom drawer when she noticed the lane 6 problem. The ball return rack on lane 6 had been sticking. She'd assumed it was a mechanical issue, a drive component, a belt. But she'd pulled the front panel off the return unit twice in the past week and found nothing obviously wrong. She'd been meaning to look at the base of the unit, where it mounted to the floor, and hadn't gotten to it. She went to lane 6 now with a flashlight and crouched down and looked under the forward edge of the ball return rack. The floor beneath it was not flush. There was a seam running along the base of the rack that wasn't mechanical. It was a lip, a fitted lid bolted flush into the floor, the same color as the lane flooring. Designed to be invisible unless you were looking for it from exactly this angle with a flashlight. 4 bolts, recessed, she needed a socket wrench. She went to Howard's tool chest, found the right size, came back. The lid lifted in 2 pieces, hinged at the back. Inside, a metal lockbox, green, about the size of a shoebox. And sitting on top of the lockbox, secured with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age and snapped when she touched it, a sealed envelope, white standard letter size. On the front, in Howard's careful hand, "My Peg, when you come back." Not if. When. She sat on the floor of lane 6 with the box in front of her and the envelope in her hand for a long moment. She opened the envelope. It was 2 pages in Howard's handwriting, the same small, even script she knew from the ledger. "My Peg, if you're reading this, then you found lane 6, which means you looked at the ball return from the right angle, which means you probably came back here to fix something and noticed the seam the way you always noticed things that weren't quite right. You were that way as a girl. You'd find the loose thread before anyone else saw the sweater needed mending. I have to tell you some things I should have said while I was alive. I wasn't sure how or when, and I kept waiting for the right moment, and that is the kind of mistake you realize you've been making only when you run out of chances to correct it. First, the book behind the wall. You found it, I expect. Everything in it is true. I kept track because I wanted to remember the names and the moments, not because I expected anything in return. God sees what you do when nobody's watching, and I figured if he was keeping score I could at least have accurate notes to hand him. Now the harder thing. I've been worried about you, Peg, not in the way a father worries about ordinary things. I know you're capable, you always were. I worried about something specific. I worried that the life you were building with Richard wasn't going to hold. I couldn't say why, exactly, and I want to be fair, I didn't know him the way you do, and I could have been wrong. But I noticed things when you visited. I noticed the way you got quieter around him each year. I noticed that you stopped bowling somewhere in the first few years, and you loved to bowl. I noticed that the things you talked about with me were his plans, and his business, and his ideas, and that when I asked about yours, you'd take a breath and say you were fine. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place to say, and because you were a grown woman making her own choices. And because I thought I might be wrong. But I also built you a floor. There's a passbook in the lockbox. It's for a savings account I've been putting money into since the year you got married. Not a lot in any given year, $40 some years, $200 in a good one. But I never stopped. I called it my peace of mind account and I never touched it. The balance as of my last entry is $67,412. It's yours, Peg. It's been yours for 29 years. I just held it in case you needed it. There is one more thing in the book that I should explain. If you go to 1989 in the ledger, you'll find an entry for R. Darnell. That's Richard. In November of that year, his first business, the one he'd had before you married, failed and left him with debt he couldn't manage. He came to me. I don't think he ever told you this. He asked for a loan, and I gave him $11,000 and I recorded it in the book the same way I recorded everyone else. I forgave it in 1996 when things were going better for you both. I tell you this not to make you angry at him. You will have your own feelings about Richard, and whatever they are, they're yours. I tell you because it's in the book, and you'll find it, and I want you to know what it means before you wonder about it. It means I tried to take care of both of you, for as long as I could, as quietly as I could. I love you, my Peg. You have always been enough. This place has always been waiting for you. Come home. Your dad, Peg, sat on the floor of lane 6 and read the letter twice. She did not cry immediately. She had learned to take news in and let it settle before she felt the shape of it, which was a habit from 29 years of needing to keep her composure in rooms where showing feelings had costs she couldn't always pay. The crying came when she read the last 2 sentences for the 3rd time. You have always been enough. This place has always been waiting for you. She sat there until the feelings had moved through her the way feelings did when you let them, which took a while. Then she opened the lockbox. The passbook was there, a standard savings account book from a Chillicothe bank. The entries in bank print going back 29 years. The last official bank entry was from 8 months before Howard died. Below it, in pencil, Howard had added 2 more amounts in his own handwriting, deposits he'd made at the counter that hadn't been formally logged. The total, with those additions, was $67,412. Also in the lockbox, the deed to Callaway Lanes, the original, older than the copy the county had. And underneath the deed a note in Howard's hand that said, "Paid in full. Free and clear. No claims. No liens. No debts." She held that note for a moment. She thought about Richard's letter on the front desk. Then she picked up her phone. "Crosby," she said. "I need to call Anna Marsh." "What did you find?" "Howard's original deed. A savings account he set up for me. And something in the ledger that you and Anna are going to want to know about." "Tell me," he said. "Richard came to my father in 1989 when his first business failed. My father loaned him $11,000. Silence. "Howard recorded it in a private ledger he kept," Peg said. "He forgave the loan in 1996. It's in his handwriting, dated and noted." Another silence, the particular kind that a semi-retired lawyer permitted himself when information arrived that was both surprising and legally significant. "Peg," Crosby said, "that doesn't prevent his legal claim exactly, but it does establish something about the nature of Richard's relationship to this property and this family." "I know," Peg said. "It also establishes the kind of man Howard was." "I know that too," she said, "but I've known that for 30 years. The judge is going to need the documentation." She was already walking back to the front desk. She picked up the ledger. She found the entry from November 1989. Darnell, R., personal loan, $11,000. Business failure. Family needs. Goodman Hope, forgiven in full, December 1996. No record to be kept after this. He had even tried to protect Richard's dignity. He'd noted that the debt should be forgotten after it was cleared. Her father had tried to be kind to everyone. Peg put the ledger carefully in her bag, with the letter, with the passbook, with the original deed. She went across the street to June's diner. "I found something," she said, sitting down at the counter. June looked at her face and poured the coffee before asking anything else. "Tell me," June said. Peg told her. June listened from beginning to end without interrupting, which was how she listened to things that mattered. When Peg finished, June was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Howard. Just the name. The way you said a name when you meant something larger than any sentence would hold. He built me a floor," Peg said. "That sounds like him," June said. "That is exactly, precisely, entirely like Howard Callaway." She set her own coffee cup down. "You know what he said to me once, when I asked him why he kept a ledger of what he'd done for people instead of just doing it and forgetting it?" Peg shook her head. "He said he wasn't keeping it to collect on it. He said he was keeping it because he didn't want to forget that people had trusted him. He said that was worth remembering." Peg looked at her coffee. "Go call Anna Marsh," June said. "I'll keep the coffee on." June's testimony took 6 minutes. She stood at the witness position with her hands at her sides and spoke to the judge clearly and without nervousness. Because she'd spent 40 years talking to strangers across a diner counter and had no particular fear of a room with a table in the middle of it. "How would you describe Callaway Lane's role in the community?" the judge asked. "It was where the town went," June said. "Thursday nights, Saturday mornings. If something had happened in your week, good or bad, you went to the bowling alley. And your neighbors were there, and Howard kept the coffee on, and you felt less alone. That's not nothing for a town of 4,000. And in your understanding, was the property known to have any formal or informal community function?" Howard ran 12 leagues over the years. He kept dues on credit when people had hard months. He ran a junior program every year for 20 years, no child turned away for not being able to pay. He fixed the pin machines in the town recreation center for free, twice, because the town couldn't afford to hire anyone and Howard could do it on a Saturday. June paused. "I don't know if those things are in any formal record, but every family in Holt knows them." The judge nodded. He asked one more question. "Miss Harker, in 40 years of knowing Howard Callaway, would you characterize him as someone who maintained a distinction between his personal business and his role in this community?" June thought about it. I'd say he didn't think there was a distinction, she said. Howard thought the business was the community. That was the whole point of it for him. Foss chose not to cross-examine. After the ruling, Anna and Peg stood on the courthouse steps in the November cold. That went well, Anna said. Yes, Peg said. The judge took a risk allowing the community testimony. He didn't have to. I know. I think he read the ledger carefully, Anna said. I think when a judge reads something like that, something that covers 40 years of a person doing right by their neighbors without any expectation of recognition, it affects the character of the room. She picked up her briefcase. Your father was a persuasive man without ever being in the room. Peg smiled. Send me the bill, she said. I will, Anna said. It's going to be considerably lower than it should be. Because Crosby asked me to and I owe him a favor, so don't argue about it. I wasn't going to, Peg said. Good, Anna walked to her car. She stopped once and turned back. Ms. Calloway, Peg, build something good with it. That seems like the instruction. I know, Peg said. I think I've been getting the instruction for a while. Tommy Darnell had been at Calloway Lanes for 3 weeks before he asked Peg a question she hadn't expected. They were closing up on a Tuesday evening, and he was putting the rental shoes back in order, a task he'd taken on without being assigned it, and he stopped and looked at the trophy wall. Is this everyone who ever bowled here? He asked. Everyone who ever won something, Peg said. League titles, high games, tournaments, since 1968. He walked along the row, reading names. How do you get on it? Win something, Peg said. Or bowl in the junior league long enough that you make the record book. He looked at the trophies for another moment. I never did anything that put my name on something, he said. It wasn't a complaint, just a fact he was carrying. Peg looked at him across the lane. There's a junior Saturday league starting in February, she said. You're too old for it. But you could help run it, if you want. Coach the younger ones. Your name goes on the staff board. She nodded at the bulletin board near the entrance. It's not a trophy, but it's a name. He looked at the bulletin board, at the staff name she'd put up last week: P. Calloway, E. Greer, C. Moulton, M. Lewis. I'd like that, he said. Then it's yours, Peg said. Go finish the shoes. He went back to the shoes. She heard him moving through the cubbies methodically in the near dark of the closed building, sorting by size the way she'd done as a girl, the way she'd taught herself and no one had taught her. Because it was the obvious system and her father had built a place where obvious systems were the right ones. She turned off the back lights and went to the front desk. Howard's cardigan was on its hook. The tally sheet from December 12th was under glass on the wall. The 1971 photograph was above the desk. 8 men in green shirts, all of them grinning. Howard in the center with his whole life still ahead of him. Peg stood at the front desk the way Howard had stood there for 42 years, and she listened to Tommy sorting shoes in the dark, and she thought, here. This is what he built. This is what it's for. The hearing was set for a Thursday in November, 6 weeks after Peg received Richard's letter. In those 6 weeks, Anna Marsh established 3 things in the county probate court's records. The first was that the deed to Calloway Lanes had been transferred to Peg in Howard's will in 2016, cleanly and fully, with no community property provisions attached, and that the brief appearance of the property on a joint financial disclosure in the first year of divorce proceedings had been a standard boilerplate inclusion by the filing firm, not a claim, not a negotiated element, not a legal entanglement of any kind. The judge could read the original filing, which said potential inheritance asset in parentheses, which meant it had been noted and then explicitly exempted from division. The second was that the $67,000 savings account, established in Peg's name with her named as sole beneficiary, predated any joint financial period by design. Howard had structured it deliberately. The third thing Anna established was more delicate. Howard's ledger was submitted as evidence of the building's community character, not as a private document, but as a record of the bowling alley's 40-year function as a community institution. To make that case, several of the ledger's entries had to be referenced, including the 1989 entry for R. Darnell. Anna had raised the question of whether to include it. It was not, strictly speaking, necessary to the legal case. Peg thought about it for a day and then said yes, not out of revenge. She thought carefully about whether she was making the decision out of anger. And she didn't believe she was. She was making it because Richard's claim rested on a premise. that Howard's property was fair game for him to pursue, and the ledger entry made clear the actual nature of the relationship between Howard and Richard. The judge should know that Howard had once helped this man. Howard had forgiven this man. And this man was now, 28 years later, making a legal claim against the building whose owner had once given him $11,000 in his most desperate hour. The judge could do with that what he liked. The hearing was held at 9 in the morning in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled very faintly of the same floor polish Peg had smelled in the Caldwell County Court 14 months ago. Fosse was there with a younger attorney from his firm. Anna Marsh sat beside Peg in a blue jacket and spoke to the judge in the precise, unhurried way Peg had learned to appreciate over 6 weeks of working with her. The judge asked a number of questions about the boilerplate disclosure. Fosse made his argument about community property principles. Anna presented the original deed, the savings account documentation, and the formal transfer record. It was not, in the end, a dramatic hearing. Legal hearings often weren't. The drama was in the documents, and the documents were clear. At the end of the first hour, the judge asked whether there were any community witnesses who wished to speak to the character of the property and its role in the town. This was not a typical request. He made it because he had read the ledger submission, and he was, like many judges in small county courts, someone who understood that the law operated within communities, and that sometimes communities had things worth saying. June Harker went first. She stood at the witness position and looked at the judge in the direct way she looked at everyone, and said that Howard Calloway had run that building for 42 years, and that in those 42 years she had never known him to turn away anyone who needed a place to go on a Thursday night, and that the building was as much a part of Holt as the water tower or the diner or the old grain elevator on the edge of town, and that the idea that a man who had never set foot inside it while Howard was alive had any claim over what Howard had built and left to his daughter was one of the most peculiar things she'd encountered in 67 years of life. The judge allowed himself a small expression. Dale Peterson followed, and Ruth Abernathy, and Ed Greer, and Lilla Cross, who had driven through that parking lot for 8 years with a feeling she now had a word for. 7 people in total, each one brief, each one saying some version of the same thing. Howard Calloway had taken care of this town, and now it was time for the town to take care of what he'd left behind. Fosse cross-examined none of them. He spoke quietly to the younger attorney beside him, and then to the judge, in language that suggested a strategic re-evaluation was underway. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When they came back, he spent 7 minutes on the legal reasoning and then ruled that the property transfer was valid and complete, that the boilerplate disclosure created no enforceable community property claim, and that the supplemental petition by Richard Darnell was denied. He added, without elaborating further, that the ledger documentation spoke to a relationship between the petitioner and the property's benefactor that the court found relevant background. He didn't say what he meant by that. He didn't need to. Fosse gathered his papers. He and his associate left without speaking to anyone. Richard wasn't there. He'd sent his attorneys, the same way he'd sent Fosse to the divorce hearing 14 months ago, which was how Richard always showed up to the consequences of his choices. Peg sat in the courthouse parking lot for a few minutes after. Not the way she'd sat in the lot in Caldwell County, searching for somewhere to go. She sat there because the morning was cold and clear, and the parking lot had a view of the bare November fields beyond the town edge, and she wanted a minute with what had just happened. She'd won. Howard had made sure of it. Really, he'd spent 40 years being exactly who he was, and what he was had been enough. She drove back to Holt and opened the bowling alley for the afternoon session, because Calloway Lanes was open Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday now, and it was Thursday. The Calloway Lanes Thursday Men's League reformed the second week of November, with 14 men and one argument about handicapping that June said sounded just like what she'd heard through the diner window in 1987. The Ladies' Friday Morning League had 9 members confirmed, and 2 more who were considering it. Junior Saturday League had 22 kids signed up, which was more than Howard had ever managed in its first year. Ed Greer's granddaughter, who was 9 and had apparently inherited something of Ed's mechanical instincts, spent a Saturday morning watching the pin machines with a focused attention that reminded Peg of herself at that age. The savings account cleared through the bank in Chillicothe. $67,412 deposited to Peg's name. Hers as it had always been hers. She put aside what she needed for the building's first full year of operating costs and the new concession equipment and a proper deep clean on the ball and shoe inventory. The rest she let sit. She knew what she wanted to do with part of it. She'd been thinking about it since the day she read Howard's letter. In February, Callaway Lanes opened enrollment for the Callaway Open, a free junior bowling league for any child in Holt County who wanted to learn, regardless of whether their family could pay. The fees were absorbed by a small fund Peg established in her father's name, seeded with $15,000 from the savings account. The brochure said what it meant. Plainly, Howard Callaway believed that a bowling alley was the most democratic room there was. The Callaway Open is his idea, finally given its proper form. 17 children signed up in the first week. She also hired 2 of them. One was a 14-year-old named Marcus from the south side of town who needed a job and had a grandmother who'd been in the Ladies' Friday League in 1994. The other was a 19-year-old from the county group home whose name was Tommy Darnall. No relation to Richard, different family, different spelling, who had been driving past Main Street for 3 weeks trying to figure out if the now lighted sign above the bowling alley meant the place was really open again. He knocked on the door on a Wednesday morning and asked if they needed any help with anything. Peg gave him a trial shift cleaning the ball return racks. He was methodical and thorough and showed up on time. She offered him a position on a Friday afternoon. He stood in the middle of the bowling alley for a moment after she said it, in the way young people stood when something they hadn't allowed themselves to want turned out to be available. "For how long?" he asked. "As long as you want it," Peg said. "This place is here. So is the work." He nodded, the careful nod of someone who didn't quite trust good news yet, but was willing to try. "The shoes need sorting," Peg said. "Start with those." He went and sorted the shoes. He was still at it an hour later, working from the largest sizes down, methodical and exact, the way you worked when you were grateful for a task with a shape to it. Peg watched him from the front desk and thought about her father. Howard had written in the ledger, hope. That was the word he used for the people he helped when their situations looked hard. Not charity. Not pity. Hope, the belief that the person in front of him had something worth building toward if someone would help them hold the floor. By the following April, the lanes were running 6 days a week. June started coming in on Thursday evenings to bowl, which she hadn't done since Howard's last league night. She bowled the way she did everything, with purpose and without complaint, and occasionally with a look on her face that suggested she was having more fun than she planned to admit. Ruth Abernathy's granddaughter joined the junior league and bowled a 160 game in her 3rd week, which Ruth announced to everyone in the diner on Saturday morning. Tommy Darnall became the most reliable person on Peg's staff, which consisted of him and Marcus and a woman named Carol, who handled the concession counter on weekends, and who had bowled in the original Thursday Men's League in the 1990s, which she maintained had been the greatest league Holt had ever seen. A claim contested by no one to her face. Howard's green cardigan hung on a hook beside the scoring desk. Not folded. Hung, the way it had always been, ready to be put back on when the morning got cool. The relic trio, the cardigan, the tally sheet, the 1971 photograph, had their place. The tally sheet was under glass now in a small frame on the wall beside the trophy case. The photograph had been enlarged and printed and hung above the front desk, the 8 men in their green bowling shirts grinning at a camera in 1971. Howard in the center with his hair dark and his face easy, and his whole life of small, sustained kindnesses still ahead of him. Peg had added one line to the bottom of the photograph, below where she'd written the date. It said, "He just kept the coffee on." Some legacies announce themselves in courtrooms and headlines in the bold type of a will, and some keep the doors locked for 8 years, patient as stone, and wait for the only person who was always meant to come through them. Howard Callaway didn't leave Peg a fortune. He left her a place to stand, and he had been standing in it, quietly, making room for everyone who needed a little room, for the better part of 40 years. That was the inheritance. And it turned out to be the only one that mattered.